Let's move over to the featherweight matchup co-main event here, as we have Choi coming in at plus 140. He goes up against Daniel Santos, who comes in at minus 160. Starting off on the Choi side of things, it was phenomenal to see him finally get his hand raised when he knocked out Bill Algeo, as that was his first victory in 8 years. If you've been a fan long enough of the UFC, you remember the type of hype that was on this kid as he went into that matchup against Cub Swanson way back in the day in Toronto. I remember being live for that one. It was an absolute war. But since that fight, since that loss, Choi struggled to stay active, whether it was due to mandatory military work that he had to do for South Korea or injuries that kept him out of competition as well. He got, obviously, that loss to Cub Swanson, got knocked out by Jeremy Stevens, got knocked out by Charles Jourdain. Then he took a bunch of time off, came back against Kyle Nelson, nearly won that fight, but unfortunately got a point taken away. Can't recall for what off the top of my head, but that fight ended up going to a draw because of that point deduction. And then he managed to bounce back with those 2 big knockout wins over Bill Algeo. And then the one against Nate Landwehr was very impressive because I predicted Choi to win that fight. I predicted him to get the knockout as well, but I didn't think it would come the way that it did. And the way it came was with Choi out-grappling Landwehr, staying a step ahead of him and scrambled the entire time, and then catching him in a crucifix position and eventually getting that TKO. It was very impressive to see him do it at the rate that he was doing it at, the pace that he was doing it at, the effectiveness of how he was doing it, especially against a guy like Landwehr, who's a very good scrambler and wrestler in his own right. But Choi beat him to the position pretty much every single time. Choi, originally known for his striking and his nasty knockout power, has rounded out his game well enough to become a good enough grappler that he can choose that route if that's what he really wants to do, depending on the type of matchup that he has in his fights. But he's a very fun fighter. Glad that he's having success. Maybe the lack of miles on his body over the last couple of years is helping him be successful at this stage, but he is 35. So that is definitely something to take into consideration as he goes into his fight this weekend with the streaking Daniel Santos. Now, Santos had a very tumultuous start to the UFC with that very poor performance against Julio Arce. He only landed 21% of his strikes that night, as Arce did a great job in terms of hitting and not getting hit. So obviously Santos ended up losing that fight by decision. But Santos has now pulled off 4 straight victories. There's that crazy knockout that he had over John Castaneda. Then he outworked Johnny Munoz Jr., who constantly tried to get Santos to the ground, and Santos would not oblige. Then the Jung Young Lee fight, we saw a different wrinkle to Santos's game. That was a fight where he leaned on his grappling more, and he was able to outwork Lee and keep him on his back and win that fight on the scorecards. Then the fight against Ju Sang Yu. That was his last one where Yu was outstriking Santos. I thought that was pretty clear. Yu was also doing a good job in terms of stopping any type of advances from Santos. And then in the second round, Santos, I don't know what his coaches told him, but he locked the fuck in, threw big strikes, eventually clips Yu with one, and then eventually put out Yu in the opening seconds of that second round by knockout. So very good way for Santos to battle back from a tough start to a fight and get back into and then get that win, earning his 4th straight victory. This is a guy that used to struggle to make 135 pounds, which is why he's fighting at 145 now. And I think there's going to be a certain level of opponent he eventually goes against that will cause him enough issue and remind him why he should be fighting at 135 this entire time. And at his best, he was a guy that would often go out there and utilize a lot of power striking, head hunting, looking to knock his opponents out. But it seems like he's leaning more so on his grappling as of late, even though he's not much of a threat in terms of finding submissions or finishes on the mat. He's at least done a great job in terms of muzzling opponents and keeping them on their back. Now this weekend, this is a very fun fight, and one that I'm kind of surprised that the love has come in on Santos as much as it has. When I originally studied this matchup, Santos was minus 130. Now he finds himself at minus 160. And I don't know what it is with the UFC and putting Daniel Santos up against South Koreans. Maybe it's a North Korean operative telling Santos to go out there and fight as many Korean fighters as he can. But stylistically speaking, I think this is a solid matchup for Choi to continue his winning ways. You know, I think he's the better and slicker striker. And then in the grappling realm, I think he's shown enough improvements there that if that's the approach that Santos looks to take here, I think Choi can stay ahead of him in that realm. I also think Choi has a better gas tank. I think Choi is more fit for featherweight as well, right? Choi will have a 3-inch height advantage as well as a 3-inch reach advantage in this fight too. And it's possible that could help him possibly set up a submission here if Santos gets a little bit too desperate with some of his takedowns. So unless Santos clips him and puts Choi away with a knockout, which is absolutely possible, right? We've seen Choi take major damage earlier on in his career, and it's possible Santos has the type of power to put him away as well. But I think Choi should win the majority of this fight, and I think he'll point Santos en route to a decision win. Yeah, kind of surprised the line is climbing as much as it has. So if anything, I might look to add on Choi there, but I like Choi here. And like I said, I think he wins by decision.